All right, so when I first started writing this video, I wrote it as a very nonchalant and objective approach to the pros and cons of Canadian Highlander. And while I still might fall into that a little bit due to how I talk when I do these videos, I realized, actually no, hold on, I really like this format and I really want to tell people about it, so let's get pumped. Throughout my Magic the Gathering experience, I've played a ton of formats. I've played Standard, Pioneer, Modern, Commander, CDH, Oathbreaker, tons and tons of different formats. And through the process of constant product fatigue and formats starting to feel stale, I have found a format that I really enjoy once again, and that is Canadian Highlander. So for those of you who don't know, Canadian Highlander is a 100 card singleton 1v1 format where both players start at 20 life. It is an eternal format, so it uses the vintage ban list, otherwise you can go back as far as you want. And instead of a ban list, the format uses a points list. So each deck can have up to 10 points in it, and particularly powerful cards get a point value. So like you can run cards like Black Lotus if you want, but Black Lotus is 7 of your 10 points for balancing reasons. So if that elevator pitch on its own sounds interesting to you, I'm linking both the Canadian Highlander website, the Canadian Highlander official Discord, and some deck resources in the description below. If that's not enough to convince you and you need some more convincing from me, then fair enough, let's get started on that. We'll start with some common questions. First one, is it like Commander? No. The only similarity that Canadian Highlander and Commander really share is that they're both 100 card singleton formats. There's no Commander in Canadian Highlander, it's not 4-player, and the game plays very differently than a game of Commander would. So if you walk into Canadian Highlander and your first deck or your mindset is in still a Commander mindset, you're not gonna have a good time. Another question, did Initiative ruin the format? No, Pleasant Kenobi, Initiative did not ruin the format. It was kind of a problem a few years ago, but ever since then, it's kind of been crept out of the meta, and Initiative is just a solid tool or a solid game plan, but we are not in the Initiative hell that Canadian Highlander used to be, frankly, years ago at this point. So what makes this format's rule set so fun and interesting? Well, a lot, actually. Variance is a huge part of any singleton format, and Canadian Highlander is no exception. Not being able to run 4 copies of the best card for your deck really makes you have to start digging and doing some deck building theory. Because sure, if you want 8 cantrips in your deck, the first cantrip is easy, it's the best one, but after that, you need to find the second best cantrip, the third best, the fourth best, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and the eighth. And then you've got your cantrip slot patched out. And that's what makes it really interesting. You have to start digging deep for those sort of effects. If you're playing a burn deck, yeah, you get to play the best burn spell, but then you need the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and before you know it, you're playing Burst Lightning. This makes finding multiple cards that do similar things a fun little deck building Easter egg hunt, and forces you to really think about what you want the cards in your deck to do. Unless you're playing 4-color soup, then just play the good cards. This means that tooling a deck for certain metas becomes fun as well. If I'm expecting a lot of aggro, I'm gonna want spot removal and maybe a couple of additional board wipes, or maybe just bigger creatures to help stonewall them. If I'm expecting a lot of combo, I need some sort of hand attack, or I need interaction in the form of counter spells, or some really low to the ground effective creatures to quickly close out the game. If I'm expecting a lot of control, I need more cards that can directly impact the board when they come down, cards that are hard to interact with like hexproof or can't be countered, and I just need cards that have good ETBs. And if against Time Vault specifically, cards like Collector Oof and Stony Silence can really shut the door on that deck. But if you run dedicated artifact hate cards like Collector Oof and Stony Silence, suddenly you've got 2 cards that are dead in most other matches. So maybe I'm running a green creature deck and I cut the Stony Silence and put Collector Oof alongside my creature tutors, acting more as a silver bullet. But even if I do find Collector Oof, they could just pivot into their mid-range game plan utilizing Urza Saga to make constructs. You know what Urza Saga doesn't care about? Shutting off the activated abilities of artifacts. And you see why I like this format and tooling for this format a lot now. No sideboards, no 4-ofs. You have to make every single card in your deck count depending on your game plan and the expected meta you're gonna run into. Canadian Highlander is a much smaller format compared to formats like Standard, Modern, Pioneer, and of course Commander, but that doesn't mean the format is solved. Archetypes are constantly created, refined, retooled, and turned into legitimate decks that put up results at events. It's also a format that is a lot more pet card friendly, as seen by cards like Kellen, Daring Traveler, and Turbo Blood, or Doomsday and Doomsday Thoracle. Since you need like the second, the third, the fourth best card that does an effect, your pet cards can cut it in Canadian Highlander. Getting access to all of Magic's history outside of the vintage ban list and having no true ban list also helps with brewing. Do you want to brew with Black Lotus? Sure, try it in aggro, try it in combo. I currently have 98 Canadian Highlander decks on my Moxfield profile. 39 of them are in a folder labeled Psychosis, because sometimes when I'm brewing, I kind of get into a bit of a haze and I remember, oh, I'm actually trying to brew like solid decks and I can lose the plot a little bit and go a little crazy. But that's just how much fun brewing is in Canadian Highlander, that a little under half of the decks that I've made for Canadian Highlander are considered Psychosis brews. This is a format where all flavors of control, red-green monsters, Mardu tokens, Underworld Breach combo, Nadu, Scapeshift, and Blue Moon are all viable archetypes and strategies that have put up results. There is an archetype called Oath Slushy that was created when someone realized, wow, Oath of Druids doesn't conflict with Underworld Breach combo, and they stapled both decks together with really good staples, leading to a combo control deck with two different win cons it can pivot between depending on the matchup. And you know what, just to hammer this point home, I'm gonna give an example of one of my own brews, not from the Psychosis brew folder. This is one of my pet decks called Esper Reanitinker. I decided to combine a Tinker artifact deck with Reanimator cards because turns out there is some synergy with reanimating artifacts. This deck pivots between Urza Saga Karnstruck Beatdown, cheating out a big artifact like Inkwell Leviathan either by reanimating or tinkering, and can even win with a Cyberdrive Awakener finish. And if I can find multiple low-tier pet deck archetypes to brew and retool, I'm sure there's something for you. But what if you just want to grab a deck and jam? It's time to talk deck list, baby! Before we get into it, I just want to say that the best resource to find deck lists is the Canadian Highlander Winners Archive on Moxfield. Here, winning lists are posted from all over the place. So if you're just looking for a resource that has decks that have put up results, that is your best bet. So go ahead and take a look at that, link in the description below. Outside of that, let's talk lists to try out.
All they do is counter other people's spells and then draw more cards.
Are you a control player? Try none other than Jeskai Control. By combining red and white removal, some of the most efficient in the format, with blue counter magic on top of the game-ending threats in these colors, Jeskai Control plays a resource war game by trading card for card until their opponent stumbles. Afterwards, they can take over the game with card advantage. With incredibly strong consistency and the highest pointed card, Ancestral Recall, in its point spread, this is a deck that rewards consistency, matchup knowledge, and correct decisions.
I have concepts of a plan.
Do you like comboing off? Did you used to play CDH? Did you play Breach in Modern because it made you feel smart? Do you want to play Black Lotus? Well then I have the deck for you. Lotus Breach is an all-in combo deck that seeks to assemble an Underworld Breach line using a plethora of tutors alongside just enough interaction to stave off any draw goers. You're gonna dig, and dig some more, hopefully before the aggro player kills you, until you have all the pieces needed to go off. This deck's points are the name of the deck, Black Lotus and Underworld Breach, and highlight the deck's all-in nature. Despite this, as long as you can keep hard graveyard hate off the field, it's anything but a glass cannon.
Aw, dang it! Aw, dang it!
Let's go gambling. Outside of consistent draws and play patterns, why not just high roll and go all in on your opening hand? Well, Turbo Blood is the deck for you. A deck that runs anywhere between 28 to 30 total lands. Lands are bad top decks after all. Turbo Blood answers the question, how many cards does it take to play a turn 1 3-drop? Well, all of them, of course. The goal of Turbo Blood is to utilize pointed and unpointed fast mana to turbo out a highly impactful 3-drop that demands an answer. That could be an initiative creature, a stacks piece, or even a 2-drop sometimes. With a triple mox point spread and a deck filled with tons of good threats, your success with this deck is only limited by the luck of your draw.
Come on, strike me down, Zeus.
Call it Harrison Ford and Mark Ruffalo, because next up is red-green monsters. This deck does exactly what it reads on the tin. 1-drop into 2-drop into 3-drop into dead. Red-Green Monsters boasts a strong, low-curve game plan as well as multiple options for higher CMC top end depending on meta. This deck preys on quirky combo decks by outracing them and can push mid-range right off a cliff. With a point spread that allows explosive fast mana starts, if aggro is your thing, Red-Green Monsters is one of the best ways to make your opponent more deader. And of course, there are far more deck lists out there, and I once again suggest that you check out the Canadian Highlander Winners Archive on Moxfield, link in the description. But don't take my word for everything that I like about Canadian Highlander. I asked a bunch of Canadian Highlander players what their favorite part of the format was, and here's some of the answers I got. Now, some of them might overlap with my reasons, but some of them might offer a little bit of a different insight into the format. I genuinely enjoy singleton formats. Even if people sometimes complain about Blue trying to homogenize the experience, I still find it so much more fun to cast 6 to 7 different cantrips each game instead of going consider, or ponder, brainstorm. Same about threats and answers. Brews aren't just dogshit memes. Some of them are actually incredibly viable and can become mainstays in the meta very quickly with 1 or 2 cards printed. Also just that tier 2 decks can play alright in tier 1 decks due to variance. A lot of my enjoyment with the format comes down to the volume of viable options. I think the Rules Council does a good job taking special care to ensure that brews have a place at the table. I like the format because it's a valid choice to play Mox Pearl and Savannah Lions in the same deck. The power level delta between the best and worst playable cards is the largest of any format. The format really rewards good deck building and tight play. Making the most of your 100 slots in a deck is a fun challenge and allows you to play cards no one else has heard of and potentially have it be the best card for the slot. You can be a deck specialist and be rewarded for it. You get to play some of the most powerful cards, but due to the points list and 100 card singleton, it doesn't feel broken. There's room for self-expression in deck lists. Pet cards have a place in the format. It's a high variance format that is still able to effectively be minimized with strong deck building and play. Games may feel the same, but interactions will be unique each time. It's really fun to brew for and win tournaments. So at this point, hopefully, I've convinced you to at least give Canadian Highlander a try. So where do you go from here? Well, luckily, there are a ton of resources to help. For starters, there's the Canadian Highlander website. On there, you can find the current points list, articles, and frequently asked questions. One of the best resources the community has is the Canadian Highlander Discord server. Weekly tournaments are hosted both as webcam events and on Cockatrice, and a database of stores that offer Canadian Highlander events is there too. The community is always building and theory crafting and are a lot of fun to be a part of. Just don't go into points increase or points decrease discussion if you know what's good for you. I know I've mentioned it already, but again, the Canadian Highlander Winners Archive on Moxfield is an amazing resource to look at lists that put up results. Of course, there are also some helpful YouTube channels if that's your thing instead. There is, of course, LoadingReadyRun and their gameplay videos, but if you're looking for channels more focused on playing competitively, I highly recommend Joking 101, Cyclops 08, and StrangeVENOM on YouTube. Joking has terrific videos on theory and philosophy for the format, as well as interviews with different players and community figureheads. Cyclops 08 and StrangeVENOM both have great Canadian Highlander gameplay at a high level. These are both great channels to watch solid games of Canadian Highlander. Every single one of these resources will have a link in the description, so please go check them out. Look, I'm not gonna try and tell you that Canadian Highlander is a perfect format. Games can be sacky, cards are never truly hard banned, and it's up to a council of people to determine if cards' points change. And if those are too big of hurdles for you to get over, then that's totally fine. Not every format is for every person. All I'm asking is for you to give the format a try, and who knows, maybe it's the breath of fresh air you need to truly enjoy competitive Magic again. I know it was for me.